Today I'm going to talk about how to write dialect into your dialogue in fiction, and the book that we're going to be looking at is The Knife of Never Letting Go by Patrick Ness.
I might need a hospital, 'cause when you look at me, I just can't breathe and all my nerves misfire.
Hello everyone, my name is Jimena. Welcome to The Singing Bookworm. If you're new to this channel, you should totally subscribe and hit the notification bell. The next few weeks I'm going to be posting 2 videos a week, all related to books and writing, so you should definitely subscribe and stay tuned for a lot of stuff coming your way. Dialect in fiction is something pretty controversial. Some people say you should never ever use it because it can come off as weird or stilted or offensive. I'm not going to say don't ever use a tool that writers have at our disposal. I personally don't use dialect very often, but I think it's something worth seeing how to do well. And this book does it really well, which is why we're going to use it as our example today. The Knife of Never Letting Go is set in a planetary colony in which the culture is based off of Puritan colonies. So that's why the dialect works really well, because even though it's futuristic, it's also kind of historical. And one of the things that I think makes this book stand out in its use of dialect is that it doesn't just use dialect in dialogue, it also uses it in the narration, because the whole book is narrated from the point of view, first-person point of view of Todd Hewitt, who's the boy who was raised in the society that has this certain dialect. So when other characters speak in that dialect, it is integrated in with the narration. It seems more natural. It seems like it's all part of the same world. There's a lot of race and class issues when talking about dialect, which is why you need to be really careful not to portray the narrator as really elevated and like super proper standard English, whereas the dialogue is like extremely dialecty, because that can make it seem as though you're looking down on the characters, as though you're creating distance between the reader and the characters, between the writer and the characters. And that can have some implications of like showing characters not being as smart or eloquent as someone who would be using standard English. I'm going to read a small section so that you can sort of see what I'm talking about when I talk about about the dialect that Todd uses in his narration. Manchi and me get past the school building and up on the little ridge and look north, and there it is, the town itself. Not that there's all that much left of it no more. One shop used to be 2. One bar used to be 2. One clinic, one jail, one non-working gas station, one big house for the mayor, one police station, a church, one short bit of road running through the center, paved back in the day, never upkept since, goes to gravel real quick. All the houses and such are out and about, outskirts like, farms, meant to be farms, and some still are, some stand empty, and some stand worse than empty. And that's all there is of Prentisstown. Population 147 and falling, 146 men and 1 almost man. So in that little excerpt you can see a few of the things that Patrick Ness is doing to portray Todd's dialect within the narration. You can see that he uses grammar that's a little bit off. Manchi and me instead of Manchi and I, which would be correct. No more instead of any more. He also uses phonetic spellings like STAYSHUN for station and THRU for through. Something I'm going to highlight over and over in this analysis is that Patrick Ness doesn't spell every word the way that Todd would say it. Because one approach that you could take to writing dialect is to spell every single word that would be said differently from standard English in a phonetic way, but that would be incredibly distracting and annoying and just not necessary. By simply misspelling specific words in a consistent way and then using specific verbal tics, like using ain't instead of isn't, don't instead of doesn't. Patrick Ness picks the most evocative ways he can change up language to portray a certain accent, and then he sticks to them. He uses them repeatedly. They're words that would be said enough to continue to evoke the dialect without having to pick a bunch of different words to change up. Another thing that Patrick Ness does to describe accents and dialects is that he contrasts them with each other. For the first few chapters, Todd only interacts with people from Prentisstown, people from his town of 147 people. So they all speak pretty similarly. None of them have extensive book learning, and they all share a sort of slang and dialect altogether. When Todd starts talking to Viola, when she starts talking to him for the first time, we get a very evocative description of the way that her accent is different from his. And it's memorable because it doesn't just describe the way that the words sound, but it also evokes the culture that produced these accents.
Her accent's funny, different from mine, different from anyone in Prentice Towns. Her lips make different kinds of outlines for the letters, like they're swooping down on them from above, pushing them into shape, telling them what to say. In Prentice Town, everyone talks like they're sneaking up on their words, ready to club them from behind.
This image of Viola swooping down on the letters from above, pushing them into shape, we both get the idea of very precise pronunciation of words. We also get an idea that she has been more traditionally educated, that she's more careful in how she speaks. We get the idea of standard English, of carefully forming words in the way that they're supposed to be formed. Whereas with the description of the Prentisstown accent, the idea of sneaking up on the words and clubbing them from behind give this idea of a more brash and rough way of speaking. And it also reinforces this idea of violence that's very present in the culture of Prentisstown. The way that Todd misspells and alters standard English within his narration carries over into his speech. So we get the sense of authenticity, that we're fully inhabiting Todd's head. We are understanding the way that he speaks and the way that he thinks are the same, that they match up. They're constructing a whole idea of his identity and his education and his cultural background and all of that. The way that other characters speak purposefully stands out from the narration and from Todd's way of speaking in a way that is really impactful, because Todd has never heard anyone speak in a way that's not the way that the people of Prentisstown speak until the beginning of this book. So every time that Viola speaks, we get more standard spelling, more standard English. It really stands out visually from the rest of the narration that surrounds it, that's in Todd's voice, which makes them stand out sonically in our head. When Todd and Viola encounter Hildy and Tam, who are the first people from a different village that they encounter in their travels, the way that they speak is very distinctive, and it immediately sets Todd apart as an outsider, even though they both have non-standard English. And this is something very important about the way that Patrick Ness portrays dialect so masterfully, is that we get the idea of sort of rural, country, kind of old-fashioned, colonial, non-standard, not as educated English from both Todd and the people of Prentisstown and the people of other settlements. But even while not all the words that they speak are changed, they're just deliberate changes, we can still appreciate how the way that these people talk is different from each other. So in Patrick Ness's book, there isn't just one type of non-standard English. It's not just proper English and improper English. We get a very rich texture of all the different types of dialects and the way that people speak.
Here we see that when both Tam and Todd say the word yer, it's spelled Y-E-R. That establishes that they both have a non quote-unquote proper English pronunciation. However, Tam and Hildy say specific words that Todd does not say. For example, twixt instead of between. And that served to make a distinction between the way that Todd and Hildy and Tam speak, while still evoking a similar sort of dialect, but the vocabulary is slightly different. But if you notice in this paragraph of Hildy's speech, that's really the only word that Todd wouldn't use that she uses. She uses yer instead of your, and ain't instead of isn't. Things that Todd would say, but just that one word is enough to make a clear distinction between the way that she speaks and the way that Todd speaks.
So I think two of the main takeaways that I have from looking at the way that Patrick Ness uses dialect in The Knife of Never Letting Go is that a few deliberate choices go a very long way in portraying dialect. So if you're thinking about using dialect, I would suggest looking at several lines of dialogue, several pages, all the lines of dialogue that come up, seeing a word that comes up fairly often, and seeing if that word can be altered in a way that portrays that accent or dialect. Deliberate, small changes go a lot farther than just riddling your dialogue with apostrophes or slang words so that it becomes almost illegible or offensive or confusing or just over the top or weird. Another takeaway that I have is that having the narration be in a similar voice as the dialogue of the main character really helps to sell a dialect. I think not having a big disconnect between the narration and the dialogue is a way to put less distance between the dialect and the reader, the dialect and the writer, which, like I said in the beginning, is a big problem, a big reason why people don't like dialect that much, because it can make the people who use dialect seemed as other, someone to be looked down on because they're not as educated or they're lower class or whatever. If there's going to be a lot of dialect in your book, the way there is in here, I would suggest seeing if you can integrate some of that dialect into the narration. If that doesn't work, either because your main character has very proper English, or if it's in third person and it's distant from the characters, so you would have to have a different narrative voice than what is in the dialogue, I would find other ways of making it feel authentic. For example, apostrophes are actually a way of distancing yourself from the dialect. If you're going to omit certain letters from a word to make it sound more dialecty, don't put apostrophes. There are obviously some words that require apostrophes, like if you're going to say, as Patrick Ness does in the novel, replace it with just S. You're going to need an apostrophe to indicate that it's not just a rogue S. But in the novel, Patrick Ness uses words like cuz and supposed. He doesn't use apostrophes to indicate that they're like wrong. Instead, he spells them in a way that makes them seem like actual words rather than words that are altered from their proper way of being spoken. Having the apostrophe indicates that there are letters missing, that the person who is writing knows that there are letters missing, and is saying there should be letters here, but this character is not speaking in a correct way. So I think not using apostrophes is a really good way of not making the way that you're spelling a dialect feel patronizing or othering. Another thing I'm going to say is don't drop the G from the end of words. It's something that's done a lot to portray certain dialects. For example, going becomes G-O-I-N instead of G-O-I-N-G. A lot of times the apostrophe is used. Don't do that. Patrick Ness doesn't omit the G, and I think that's really effective. It's something that he could easily have omitted, but there are a couple reasons why it's a good idea not to omit it. First of all, there are an unimaginable amount of words in the English language that end in ing. If you were to drop the G from every one of them, especially since this book is so dialect heavy, it would be incredibly annoying. Secondly, it's not really evocative. It's not really like your Y-O-U-R versus Y-E-R. It's not really evoking the difference in pronunciation as much. Very few dialects pronounce the G anyway. So that's another reminder to pick a small amount of words to change up words that will be evocative, that will repeat, but not enough to make it annoying. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that was useful to you. I hope that sparked some ideas. Even if you aren't using dialect in your current work in progress, I think it's something interesting to think about, something to have in your toolbox in case you need it later on. Let me know in the comments if you have seen any techniques that authors have used to portray dialect that you find really effective, or any techniques that you've seen used that you don't like at all, that you would really not want to use. Again, if you want to see more videos like this, more videos related to books, more videos related to book analysis, more writing advice and that sort of thing, please like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. I'm going to be coming out with 2 videos a week for the next few weeks. I will see you next week.
I might need a hospital, 'cause when you look at me, I just can't breathe and all my nerves